Thank you very much. Okay, our next part of the program is a panel discussion, a roadmap to creating a digital supply chain. I'd love to introduce our moderator, Eric Wilson from Escalade Sports. Thank you, Eric.
Good morning. I think we're going to continue this magical journey and talk about digitized supply chains. So we're going to start getting into the meat and potatoes. I mean, it's great. I love this part of these conferences where you're actually looking at practitioners who have done or doing this and kind of get feedback of exactly. And you said I was okay. Now I don't have to yell. Good morning. So we're going to talk a little bit about digitized supply chain. And really, I mean, historically, we've had linear, discrete type of siloed supply chains. That world has changed. We're now looking at really an ecosystem. You're hearing that word more and more, is the ecosystems. And really to enable those ecosystems is digital supply chains. And digital supply chains can be anything from the back end to the front end, and that's really what we're going to talk about. So being there is some ambiguity in that word, I think I'm going to start off with really allowing our panel to kind of describe what digitized supply chain is, either in their world or what they see it as. So, I mean, if anybody wants to take it, go ahead. What do you think?
I think digital supply chain is more of a way to get closer to the customer and really get that data as fast as possible. To optimize your own supply chain. So really it's all about the customer and creating more relationship with the customer more than your client or your distributor.
Okay. Hey Zach, what's digital supply chain in your world?
I think that in the mattress industry, I work for Tempur Sealy, and one of the things that we've seen is a dramatic shift in the customer buying experience. And from a transition of a traditional brick and mortar sort of environment where folks go out into a store and into a selling environment intentionally, now the ability to click through a selection of offers online has incredibly changed how quickly we have to respond to customer demand. So kind of to the same point, it all becomes how do you get closer to the customer? How do you understand what the customer expects out of the experience?
Okay.
So from the industry I came from, it was the cheese industry. We had a different business model. Our customers tended to be distributors, so they weren't as sophisticated. So for us, the digital supply chain was really about our supplier end, and our suppliers were producers, cows, farmers. And so we actually did a lot with digital activities in managing herds. So we had RFID tags on cows so we could understand their behavior, so we could understand cow health, cow production, things as detailed as if a cow was laying down for too long, they wouldn't be producing milk. So we would be able to identify which cows were laying down. So that was much more about information and improving raw materials.
You mentioned information, and I think that really becomes the key of, traditionally you had product flow go one direction, information flow go the other. And if we're really talking about an ecosystem, we're talking about information from multiple different sources and really starting to manage that information. So with that, I mean, if you're looking at the information side of it, is the information changing now? And is there new ways that we're enabling technology to really get a hold of that information? Go ahead, Sara.
Sure. I think that traditionally, Tempur always got all of our data as historical trends. So we would see what was sold in the market as we replenish stock to our retailers. And we've implemented a number of activities with key retailers to get point of purchase information. The faster that we can get even brick and mortar sale data, the sooner we can identify trends and begin to make changes in the supply strategy. With companies like Amazon, Wayfair, Groupon that have immediate sales, all of that data is transferred almost from the second of purchase so that we can see it quickly. I think that understanding how to evolve not only into a traditional online environment, but understanding how to get data from retailers and your more traditional lines of business has been really important for us. We've invested heavily in trying to understand what the customer expects on both ends of that spectrum. Without the information and that sort of approach, we'd be very blind.
Yeah, I think at Duvel we only have the information that the retailer wants to share with us. So we're really struggling to get that customer information at the very end. So we don't actually know what our customers are buying or which Duvel products. Yeah, I mean we know what we're selling, but we don't really know where they're buying it. And we're actually struggling to get that information because a lot of retailers in Belgium, they don't want to share that information, so they want to keep it private. So that's some difficult discussions, I think, that we will have with them to get that data and to really make like a partnership with them and to convince them that it will also help their needs because they will have more visibility on their on-shelf and products. And so on.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know we focus a lot on customers, which we should. But when you're looking at the supply chain, there's other information we get. I think it's going to be a great session on leading indicators we're going to talk about. And there's a lot of other information that comes into a supply chain. And I know a lot of companies here are B2B and struggling with the same thing. So when you're looking at other information you have, I mean, it could be a cow laying down. I mean, what other types of information are we digitizing and bringing into our supply chains?
So some of the things we were doing was we were looking at weather and applying that to our inventories of milk because weather affects cow production. So we were bringing in weather indicators. We were bringing in some predictors on what was going to happen with the prices, so we would know if we should go out and buy milk because it would be less expensive. But then that's where we actually used Arkieva's tool in once we knew what our inventories of milk were going to be. Milk obviously doesn't have a long shelf life, so it had to be produced. So we worked with Arkieva to do a balancing tool, rebalancing of where do we move our milk. And so we leveraged that kind of data, and then our biggest issue was how do you mine it and how do you use it. That was really our challenge, but we did bring other indicators outside of just the herds.
You mentioned Arkieva, the technology part of it, and I think we'd be amiss in an Arkieva at 25 not to really talk about some of the technology pieces, but how do we get a hold of the information, the technology? Anybody currently, and I'm currently doing a digital transformation where we are completely revamping and bringing Arkieva on at Escalade Sports, but I know you've been through the journey there as well. What are we doing to get a hold of the information, and how is technology helping enabling that? We'll start with the beer.
It's actually very difficult to get more information than what we have now at the moment. So I think, first of all, we can buy information. So we can buy Nielsen figures to really improve our forecast. We can look at trends, for example. A lot of things that we do because we export a lot of our business as well. So we look at customer behaviors in, for example, China. They're drinking more beer there, so that's like more the market trends. But it's still difficult for me as well as a demand planner to really use that information in our forecasting system or in Arkieva as well. So that's something that we're still kind of struggling with at the moment.
I think on the Tempur side, speaking of a digital transformation, we actually within the last year have upgraded our interfaces with Arkieva and have invested heavily in a DRP tool that offers a lot more functionality than what we have had previously. Along the same lines, our business is in the process of upgrading our ERP in its entirety, and so understanding how the connections and the interfaces from Arkieva to our new ERP system is going to be really critical. I wish I could tell you exactly how we're going to do all of that now and get the right data in the right place, but that's part of the question that I think evolving businesses always have to answer, and it's certainly the one that we're trying to do now. If we look at the channel strategy for how Tempur sells products, and I go back to the fact that where we get information is very different. Historically, we've always gotten it from purely sales data. We knew when promotions were coming. We knew that the mattress industry is very promotionally driven. So we have summer selling season from Memorial Day to Labor Day, and that's where the bulk of our mattress sales take place. Amazon is creating almost independently a whole nother set of promotional windows around Prime Day. And we never used to sell products at a huge rate around Prime Day, but distributing some of our accessories through Amazon has changed the scope of how we have to go get information and pipe it into our planning tools.
Okay. It's doing a lot more promotion, and I think being able to plan the promotion, I was excited to see in Arkieva 5.0 we're doing more of the promotional planning. You mentioned demand planning. A lot of our focus is we're supposed to reduce forecast error with no bias. That's our primary goal. And I really think our goal is to provide insights. We are to help answer questions. And really that's what we do. And that's where like Arkieva and technology helps us answer questions. A lot of people are moving from Excel. 70% of the companies on Excel moving to a system type situation. I know you've got experience working at that. I mean, how do we help at a B2B, maybe not or touching the customer, how do we help our customers, the distributors, and how are we migrating away from a Excel based to a system that helps enable that? I think you got some experience with that, don't you?
Well, it's not good experience, to be honest, because our supply chain is, the front end of our supply chain isn't very sophisticated. So a lot of them don't even have EDI. So we had very difficult trouble transmitting information. So we were actually getting information from them on spreadsheets and downloading it into our systems. So that's been a challenge, and so our journey was much more about educating and helping sell the value of the value chain. And so we are working with them on trying to standardize, but we have a long way to go before we can get there because of their sophistication, which is why we chose, we have a roadmap that's really end-to-end on technology and make it a digital supply chain. But that's a lot of why we focused on the back end. Right now, we're focusing on the middle because inventory management is very critical to our industry. And so that's really where we've had to go. So we're going to where we can have some successes because of the challenge that we have in our industry.
So you mentioned the roadmap. I mean, what kind of roadmap should a company look at for where we want to go to where we are now? I mean, what is the first step we're going to take? If you had to go back.
I think for Tempur, the biggest thing that we could have done is, and kind of to your point, is improve the information that we receive, and sometimes that takes a partnership that's a little painful or uncomfortable, the cart leading the horse almost. We have a very inaccurate customer base where forecasts we get are either wrong entirely, very misplaced, and I think that the level of sophistication is, even with the best tools that we have, they can only bend, and there's a topic in the book about bad data in, bad data out. That for me has been one of the biggest challenges that we've faced as our business has evolved over the last 18 months, is to understand how do we get better inputs, and a lot of those inputs come from our customer base. So helping them understand their own inventory strategy, the replenishment cycle of our products to them, and then what do they expect for customer demand to look like. There's a wide gap in reality and expectations sometimes, and all of that costs money. And we tend, as supply base, tend to be the ones that carry that burden for the most part.
So what would be your first step if looking at digitizing their supply chain?
I think it's also like bad data in, bad data out. That's something that we're also looking at, especially for the promotion planner, for example. We're looking at installing that in the next couple of months, because selling beer, we do sell with a lot of promotions. But then it's always difficult to know what kind of percentage are you cannibalizing for your regular sales, like what are you selling on top of your regular volume. So that's something data-wise that we're still trying to figure out, also discussing that with our retailers, because we don't really know in advance what they will be selling in for a promotion and what they're selling out. So it's really all about making that connection with the retailer and getting more information from their side.
Is Arkieva helping with that as far as understanding those hierarchies? Because I know one of the strong points of
Yeah.
Arkieva is that dynamic hierarchy, being able to do
exactly. And I also think that the tool, the promotion planner, it's pretty, I mean, it looks pretty easy to use also for the salespeople. So it's not only the demand planner that is responsible for getting all the data right, it's also like a collaboration internally with your sales guys to make them really understand, like, okay, how much inventory can we have? What is the retailer ordering? Because they know what they want to sell, but they don't always understand like the entire impact on the supply chain. So it's kind of also a tool to start working together internally on that.
We've shared data from Arkieva in terms of scenario planning. So if a specific retailer runs a promotion that's 3 weeks from now, how does that impact our aggregate inventory? And ideally, when would we have known when that promotion was going to be planned so that we could stage inventory appropriately? We have a very responsive customer base that's typically follows trends. So we'll have a trendsetter set some sort of promotional program. Mattress Firm, for instance, has instituted a lot of promotional activities in the last 12 months in a way to drive volume. And we've seen other retailers begin to adopt similar practices. And without early signals and without some of the modeling and the planning that we've put in front of those retailers, we would have had a really difficult time supplying the inventory that they expected to be available.
Is your inventory model changing now? You guys are getting more into the e-commerce and going back to direct-to-consumer. Is your inventory models changing then?
It is. If you rewind several years ago, we had roughly 10 or 11 DCs staged across the U.S. And to some extent, I think that most companies began to look at how to optimize cash. And so we consolidated our warehouses and really structured them much more strategically in footprints that made sense for cash flow reasons. Primarily because of Amazon and the speed of which inventory has to be readily available for customers, we have begun re-expanding our network again. So almost 180 degrees different approach now. We're planning to open additional warehouses over the course of the next 18 months to 2 years to make sure that we have product closer to customers. A little bit different approach in how much we keep, of course, versus strategies from previously. But yeah, it's I think much more focused on how do we give the best customer experience, because the landscape is so much more competitive now than it used to be in terms of delivery methods. We can't afford not to be prepared.
Okay. Is inventory an issue for the beer market?
Yeah, it definitely is. This summer we had quite some stock issues. We had a heat wave in Belgium, so we had a lot of out of stocks in this summer. So it's actually the opposite of too much inventory. We had too less inventory.
Hot weather makes people drink more beer.
It
does. It works here too that way.
In Belgium it does. Because our SKUs are also growing, so we do have inventory problems. But it's okay. I think we're kind of leveling it out. So it's not like we have too much obsoletes or it's okay. I think that we're all pretty okay with our inventory levels.
And the obsolete stuff, so you just send it over?
Yeah.
It's because we're looking at a kind of a push-pull type. You're looking at getting closer to the consumer and where that pull. Is yours truly a pull where the consumer's driving your production?
Yeah, it's different because everything is produced in Belgium, because it's a Belgian beer. So we also have a lot of warehouses around the world. So it's kind of like a push and pull situation. I think in Belgium it's more of like a push situation, and for export it's more like a pull situation. And also we're not really aware all the time. We don't have like an ERP system that goes around the world, unfortunately. So I wouldn't be able to see how much stock, for example, we have of Duvel in China. so they're really in control of their own inventory. So yeah, that's something that we're also working on, is getting that data ready available for everyone in the business, because we're really like, for exports, we're actually relying on the forecasts of all the different countries, and what they need actually from month to month. So that's also kind of difficult to get in conversations with them, because we just don't know what they have on stock.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in the cheese business, it's really very interesting. Inventories are absolutely critical for the cheese business, but for different reasons. We, our most important thing is the quality of our cheese. So we have to manage not as much the level of inventory, but the age of our inventory. So that was an area where Arkieva was able to develop some very, very creative solutions to help us manage within days, and they even went to the extreme to help us manage moving product to different regions of the country to keep our age within limit, because we have some cheese obviously that many, many months, but we also have some ages that were days, so we had to manage within days. So our inventory concept it's much more, that's probably the biggest complication in our business. It's not as much as the consumer pull as our desire to ensure they had the right cheese in the right age at the right time. So that's where inventory management became really complicated for us.
That's, I think, the next step we have to look at in the bedding industry. I'm sure you guys have all heard of Casper, Lowell, Tufted Needle, all the bed-in-a-boxes that are literally flooding the market right now. There's not really a shelf life on mattresses for the most part, although compressed products do have a tendency not to reanimate after X number of months sitting in a compressed state. So we've never really had to look at shelf life in terms of weeks or months. It's more been a sheer inventory dollar number. How much do we have and how much do we need? But we're beginning, because products are competing at that end of the market, to have to understand if we want to play there, how do we do it in a smart way? And shelf life is something that's not really been explored heavily in the mattress industry. Companies like Amazon and the distributors have a really high allowance where they just assume that some percent of those mattresses, and it's a statistical figure, aren't going to reanimate, and they take them back on a return policy. That's not really the best sort of customer experience. So understanding how to do that better is going to be really important, I think, at least for the mattress industry.
Okay. We've got about 5-10 more minutes left, so kind of focusing then on going forward in your individual companies. We talked digitize the supply chain all the way from the customer to the inventory to a push type of, we're looking at cows even. So we truly went from the raw material to the end user. When you're looking at all the different nodes, different parts of the supply chain and creating the ecosystem, everything's starting to work together. Going away from that siloed approach, linear silo approach to where the ecosystem where everybody's talking and sharing information and operating, utilizing analytics. What part of your supply chain going forward do you think you kindly need to focus on, and would you, magic paintbrush from Disney, being able to create the most digitized impact of your supply chain right now? You get the best ROI.
So again, for us, I talked about our customers, distributors. We know that part of our roadmap for a digital supply chain has to be, how do we reach our customers? And we're too away from that, because we go to distributors who go to high-end restaurants who then try and get to the consumer. So how do we get that consumer to want to go back to that restaurant and order the pizza with the cheese that we offer? So that's our challenge. How do we get there? How do we start getting data? How do we start changing the the consumer behavior? So that's going to be our challenge going forward. And we know that's on a roadmap, and we're figuring out some things. So don't have the solutions yet, not all of them.
Okay.
I think for Duvel, the first thing would be how to go from shipping forecast to really a sales forecast. So how to get the data really from the customer into the Arkieva system and forecasting with that data. Secondly, our production planning, they're still using an Excel-based file to do their production planning, like you said, 70% of the businesses. So we focused on demand planning first, inventory management, but we're really still struggling with the production planning parts. So we're hoping that we can digitalize that in the next coming of months. Yeah.
I think for Tempur Sealy, I feel like I'm repeating a lot of the same comments a little bit, but one of the big things that we have to understand is how to reach our customers better, and how to get our products to those customers through new channels. So we've invested, I've talked a little bit about expanding into Amazon, Wayfair, all of the online, the kind of big four retailers right now, but we've also put a lot of investment into our direct-to-consumer business. So Tempur was born as a 1-800 call-in kind of infomercial sort of product, and it expanded into brick and mortar stores. The presence that we had in a direct-to-consumer environment really shrank until the internet started booming, and since then we've still only tapped a small part of, I think, what's accessible there. We're starting to bridge into the third-party routes, but we have a huge amount of energy right now donated to building the direct-to-customer experience, and that means launching new websites that are specific to our products, that link back to the call center or to our normal direct processing center. And the interesting thing is understanding the dynamic between the customer that wants to buy from TempurSealy.com versus the customer that wants to go on Amazon and get a deal on Prime Day versus the customer that still wants to go to a store and test out a product and lay on it and talk to a salesperson who is an expert on what the options are. For us, it's about really sizing and scoping what each of those channels look like, and then ensuring that we have a plan to support, kind of to your point, how do we get better forecast sales data, not just historical trends? How do we capture that and then roll it into a model that gives us a holistic view of what our business should look like?
So I think you're talking about a true omni-channel.
Absolutely.
You have multiple touch points with your consumer. And being able to plan a supply chain around that is becoming more complex. I mean, the Amazon effect is not just closing down brick and mortars, it's changing the way we plan. And I think that's what you're seeing. And you're seeing Arkieva technology help enable those multiple channels.
Yeah, absolutely. I talked about, we upgraded our DRP system recently, and that was to help with some of the challenges we see in preparing adequately. We get a lot of surprises right now with some of those channels, and helping understand how we can be better prepared. Arkieva has been one of the tools that has certainly been a big part of that.
Okay. Any closing remarks, Ferdy? If you want to leave people with one thing, what would it be to focus on Monday morning? I usually like to tell people, hey, Monday morning, take away from this conference, take this one piece and start doing something. What would be the one piece you'd have them take away? Anything? Now this is one put you on the spot.
That's okay. What I would recommend, which I think for all of you in this room is probably obvious, but have a roadmap. Know where you want to go. Know that it's going to take a while to get there. But don't wait too long, because technology is going to change before you get to your roadmap. So pick something, do it, be successful, and make sure it's within what your business is all about.
Yeah.
Yep. I'd say the same thing.
So ditto.
Well, I mean, support the
That's it.
That was exactly what I would have said. I think that choosing a strategy, and ties into the roadmap piece, is we have a CEO who's fond of funny sayings on Monday morning emails, and he wrote one time that talked about, you can either be the squirrel in the middle of the road, or you can be the squirrel that sees the car coming and get out of the way. And there's a lot of flattened squirrels on the road. So what he meant by that is you have to have a strategy and understand where you have to shift and move in order to really implement it. That is speaking volumes right now for our business. I'd say adopt that idea if you can.
I think the one thing, if you can take something away from this, would be change. Things have changed and are continuing to change, and it's going to change at more of an exponential rate the next few years. We went from siloed type supply chains to integrated supply chain, and now you're starting to hear orchestrated supply chains. And that really talks about the evolution, and really the evolution that Arkieva went through as well. I mean, you start off with really descriptive analytics, but going into predictive analytics. Now the Amazon effects is changing the way we plan. We have to look at new things opposed to just time series data. We have to look at, clicks and rankings and if you win the box. And promotions are playing a big piece of that. And we're starting to look at predictive analytics. And the next one, you get to that orchestrated supply chain, you're looking at prescriptive analytics. And I think we kind of touched on a little bit here. It's really understanding the consumer behavior and why is consumer buying and start driving towards that. No matter if you're B2B or if you're dealing in an omni-channel, you still have a consumer. And you're still selling that consumer something, and you can drive behavior if you understand what the consumer needs are. That's why I think the Disney presentation was good, because it really is about everything we're doing as well. So with that, I think we're out of time for this panel as well. It's been, I love these type of sessions to be able to hear from experts. They will be around the next day and a half. Please, during break, lunch, get with them, talk with each of them, and pick their brains. And while you're networking, this is a wealth of information, not only from the people who work with Arkieva and here presenting, but the practitioners that are in the trenches every day as well. So with that, thank you very much.